The Old Aunt, world-famous story by Munshi Premchand. The story of the old aunt is full of human emotions. It deals with the problem where the other family members start neglecting elderly relatives in order to get their wealth. Not only are they ignored, but they are also disrespected and even denied food. It portrays the harsh reality of this behavior in Indian middle-class families. Let's listen to Munshi Premchand's famous story, The Old Aunt. Old age often resembles a second childhood. The old aunt was left with nothing but complaints and tears. Her eyes, hands, and feet had all given up. She would lie on the floor and cry loudly if things were done against her wishes, if mealtime was delayed, if the food was insufficient, or if she didn't get something from the market. Her crying wasn't just lamenting, she cried out loudly. Her husband had been dead for a long time. 7 sons had grown up and moved away, leaving her with only one nephew in the world. She had left all her property to this nephew. At the time of writing the will, he had made many grand promises, but those promises were just empty words. Although the annual income from the property was not less than 1 or 200 rupees, the old aunt could barely get enough dry food to eat. Budram was a good-natured man as long as it didn't affect his pocket. Rupa was quick-tempered but feared God, so her harshness towards the old aunt wasn't as evident as Budram's kindness. Budram sometimes felt guilty about his unfairness. He thought that because of this property, he was living a good life now. If the situation could be improved by verbal consolation or explanation, he would gladly do it. But fear of additional expenses kept his kindness in check. On the other hand, if someone kind sat at the door and the old aunt started her loud lament, he would get angry and scold her loudly. The boys, who have a natural aversion to old people, would bother the old aunt even more by making fun of her or throwing water on her. She would scream and cry. But it was well known that she cried only for food. Therefore, no one paid much attention to her cries. When she would get angry and start cursing the boys, Rupa would come to the scene. Out of fear, the old aunt used her harsh words sparingly. However, this approach was more effective than crying. If anyone in the house loved the old aunt, it was Budram's youngest daughter, Ladli. Out of fear of her 2 brothers, Ladli would sit with the old aunt and share her sweets or snacks. Although Ladli's protection was very costly due to her brothers' interference, it was preferable to being subject to their bad behavior. This mutual support and affection created a bond between them. It was night time. The sound of a wedding band was coming from Budram's house, and the village children were watching the festivities in awe. Guests were lounging on cots, getting their head massages, and a bard was reciting verses nearby. Some guests were applauding the bard, feeling as if they deserved the praise themselves. A few educated young men were frustrated with the rustic gathering and considered participating beneath their dignity. Today was the wedding ceremony of Budram's eldest son, Sukhram. The celebration was in full swing at home with women singing and Rupa busy preparing food for the guests. Pots were set on stoves, one had puris and kachoris frying, another was making samosas, and a big pot was cooking spicy curry. The tempting aroma of tea and spices filled the air. The old aunt sat in her dark room, consumed by thoughts of her sorrow. The delightful aroma made her restless. She thought, maybe I won't get any puris. It's been so long, and no one has brought me food. It seems like everyone has it in everything. There's nothing left for me. Thinking this, she couldn't help but cry. But she restrained herself out of fear of Rupa. Oh, what a wonderful smell! Who cares about me now? When I have to worry about just a piece of bread, how can I expect to get puris? This thought made her cry uncontrollably again, her heart aching, but she held back because of her fear of Rupa. The old aunt remained lost in these sorrowful thoughts for a long time. The smell of ghee and spices made her heart ache more. Her mouth watered, and remembering the taste of puris made her feel a tickling sensation in her heart. Who should she call? Today, Ladli hasn't come either. The 2 boys cause trouble every day. Today, they are nowhere to be seen. She wished she knew what was being cooked. In her imagination, the old aunt saw pictures of puris, red, fluffy, and soft. If only she could get one puri to hold and look at. She thought she might as well sit in front of the pot and wait. The puris would be floating in the frying pan, getting crisp and golden. After being taken out hot from the pan, they would be placed on the plate. We can smell flowers at home too, but there's a different pleasure in going to the garden. Having decided this, the old aunt sat down with difficulty and crawled on her hands and knees to the threshold, finally managing to get down and slowly crawl to the frying pan. At that time, Rupa was in a flurry, moving from one room to another, from the frying pan to the upper floor. Someone came in from outside and said that the master is asking for pandai, a cold drink. Rupa started preparing it. At that moment, another person came and said that the bard, singer, has arrived and needed something. As Rupa was preparing something for the bard, a third person came and asked how much longer the food would take to be ready. He demanded that the drum and cymbals be removed. The poor woman was running around in all directions, bewildered and frustrated. Her anger had no outlet. She was scared that the neighbors might start saying she was getting flustered. Her throat was parched with thirst. She was sweating due to the heat but had no time to drink water or cool herself. She also feared that if she turned her gaze away for a moment, everything might get stolen. In this turmoil, she saw the old aunt sitting near the frying pan and was enraged. Her anger could not be contained, and she did not consider that the neighbors were present. What would they think? What would the men say if they heard? Like a frog pouncing on a worm, she lunged at the old aunt, shaking her with both hands, and said, "May your stomach burn. It's like a furnace." Sitting in the room was suffocating. The guests haven't eaten yet. The offerings to the gods haven't even been made. I couldn't bear it any longer. I've come here and taken over. If that tongue had been eating all day, it wouldn't have been in someone else's pot. The village will say the old woman can't even get a full meal. This thought further fueled her anger. She cursed and said the old aunt should be left alone. Her name was being tarnished. She would rather die than give up. She was stuffing herself so much that it seemed like it all got consumed somewhere. If she meant well, she should sit in her room. When the household members were ready, she would also get her share. She was not a goddess to have water withheld from everyone before being worshipped herself. The old aunt did not raise her head. She did not cry or speak. Silently, she crawled away to her room. The shock was so severe that all her mental and emotional strength was focused on that distress. It was as if when a large chunk of ice breaks and falls into a river, the surrounding water rushes in from all directions to fill the gap. The food was ready. Plates were laid out in the courtyard. The guests began to eat. The women started singing traditional songs. The barbers and servants of the guests were also eating separately, but according to the norms of hospitality, no one could get up until everyone had finished. A couple of educated guests were irritated with the servants' behavior, finding the restriction pointless and unnecessary. The old aunt was regretting her actions in her room, thinking about how things had turned out. She was not angry with Rupa but regretted her own haste. The truth was, as long as the guests had not finished eating, the household members could not eat. She could not wait any longer. The water had been served in front of everyone. Now she would not go until someone called her. Making this decision in her mind, she quietly waited for an invitation, but the tempting smell of ghee was testing her patience. Every moment Anna felt like an eternity, thinking that the plates must be laid, the guests must have arrived, people must be washing their hands and feet, and the barbers must be serving water. She imagined that the guests must be seated for the meal and the traditional songs were being sung. She laid down, pretending to be late, and started humming slowly. She realized she had been singing for a long time. Had the guests been eating all this time? She heard no conversation. Surely, people had eaten and left, and no one had come to call her. Perhaps Rupa was annoyed and did not call her, thinking she would come herself. There were no guests to call and bring her. The old aunt got ready to leave, hoping that in a moment, puris and spicy vegetables would be served to delight her taste buds. She made various plans in her mind. First, she would eat puris with vegetables, then with yogurt and sugar. Kachoris with raita would be delicious. Whether people thought well or ill of her, she would eat as much as she could. After so many days of not having puris, she would not just get up without eating. She sat down and crawled into the courtyard. But fate had misjudged the time, as the group of guests was still seated. Some were licking their fingers, watching if others were eating too. Some were worried that the puris might be left out of the oil. If only someone could bring them inside. Some were licking their tongues after eating yogurt, while others were shyly asking for more. In the meantime, the old aunt crawled into their midst. Many people were startled and got up, shouting, "Who is this old woman? Don't let her touch anyone." Pandit Budram, seeing the old aunt, was furious. Holding a plate of puris, he slammed it down on the ground and, like a ruthless moneylender grabbing the throat of a proud, naive debtor, he grabbed the old aunt by both shoulders and dragged her, throwing her into the dark room. The dream of feasting vanished in the gust of a storm. The guests ate, the family ate, the musicians, the washermen, and the cobblers all had their fill, but no one asked about the old aunt. Both Budram and Rupa had already decided to punish her for her shamelessness. Nobody had any sympathy for her old age, helplessness, or diminished intellect. Only Ladli was troubled for the old aunt. Ladli was very attached to the aunt. She was a simple, innocent girl with no hint of childish mischief or naughtiness. Every time her parents had dragged the aunt cruelly, Ladli's heart sunk. She was frustrated that they didn't give the aunt more puris. Did the guests eat everything, and would it matter if the aunt ate before them? She wanted to comfort the aunt but was afraid of her mother. She hadn't even touched her own puris, saving them in a box for her dolls. She wanted to take those puris to the aunt. Her heart was restless. The old aunt would be so happy to hear her voice and see the puris. She would surely show her love. It was 11 at night. Rupa was asleep in the courtyard. Ladli couldn't sleep, her excitement over feeding the aunt kept her awake. She placed the box of puris in front of her and, when she was sure her mother was deeply asleep, she quietly got up and wondered how to go. It was dark all around. Only the fire in the stoves flickered, and a dog lay near the stoves. Ladli's gaze went towards the neem tree by the door, where she saw Hanumanji sitting. His tail and mane were clearly visible. She closed her eyes in fear. At that moment, the dog got up, which reassured her. The presence of a wakeful dog was more comforting than several sleeping men. She picked up the box and headed towards the old aunt's room. The old aunt remembered only that someone had grabbed her shoulders, and then she felt as if she were being carried up a mountain. Her feet kept hitting stones, and then she was thrown down from the mountain. She lost consciousness. When she came to, there was no sound. She realized everyone must have eaten and gone to bed, and her fate had also gone to sleep. How would the night pass? What should she eat, Ram? Her stomach was burning. No one even cared about her. What would cutting her stomach achieve? They had no pity, wondering if the old woman would die soon. Why would they show her mercy? She ate only the bread of hunger, nothing else. And this was her state, being blind and crippled. Nothing was clear to her. If she went to the courtyard, would Budram have told her that people were still eating and to return later? Rupa had scolded her in front of everyone over those very puris. Even after all that mistreatment, her stony heart did not soften. Everyone was fed, but her concerns were ignored. If they didn't give her then, why would they now? She lay down despondently, her throat filling with emotion, but she did not cry in front of the guests. Suddenly, she heard a voice in her ear, "Aunt, get up, I've brought puris." The old aunt recognized Ladli's voice and quickly sat up. She felt Ladli with both hands and lifted her into her lap. Ladli handed her the puris. The aunt asked, "Did your mother give these?" Ladli proudly replied, "No, these are my share." The old aunt pounced on the puris. Within 5 minutes, the box was empty. Ladli asked, "Aunt, are you full?" Just as a little rain can create more humidity, those few puris increased the old aunt's appetite and craving. She said, "No, dear, go ask your mother for more." Ladli replied, "Mother is asleep. If I wake her, she'll beat me." The old aunt felt the box again. There were a few crumbs left, which she ate, licking her lips and saving each bite. Her heart was aching to get more puris. When the dam of patience breaks, the flow of desire becomes uncontrollable. Reminding the drunkards of their ecstasy makes them mad. The old aunt's desperate heart was swept away by this torrent of desire. She lost the sense of right and wrong. She managed to control this desire for a while but then suddenly said to Ladli, "Hold my hand and take me to where the guests had their meal." Ladli didn't understand the aunt's intention. She took the aunt's hand and led her to the discarded plates and bowls, where the old, hungry, and foolish woman began picking up and eating the leftover puris. How delicious they were! The curry was so tasty, the kachoris were so crisp, and the samosas so flaky and soft. Despite her diminished intellect, the old aunt knew she was doing something she shouldn't be. She was licking others' leftover plates, but old age had reached the final stage of its craving. When all senses converge on one center, that center becomes their pleasure. At that moment, Ladli, who was observing this, had to witness such a scene. At that very moment, Rupa woke up. Realizing Ladli was missing, she looked around the bed, wondering if the girl had fallen. Not finding her there, she got up. To her shock, she saw Ladli standing silently near the small plates while the old aunt was picking up and eating leftover puris from the plates. Rupa's heart sunk. It was like seeing a knife on a cow's neck, the sight was unbearable. Her cousin-in-law was performing such a despicable and degrading act for a few pieces of puri. It was a scene that made viewers' hearts tremble. It felt as if the earth had stopped and the sky was spinning. Rupa felt no anger. What's the use of anger in the face of such a lesson? Her eyes filled with tears of pain and fear. Who is to blame for this sin? With heartfelt humility, she raised her hands to the sky and said, "O God, have mercy on the children. Do not punish me for this injustice, we will be ruined." Rupa had never seen her own selfishness and injustice so clearly before. How cruel I am. The property that brings me an income of 200 rupees a year is in such a state because of me. O God, I have committed a grave sin, please forgive me. Today was my son's engagement. Hundreds of people ate, and I was a servant to their whims. For my own name, for my own glory, I spent hundreds of rupees. Yet, I could not even provide a full meal to the one who made it possible for me to eat thousands of rupees worth. Just because she is an old woman, helpless, and voiceless. She lit a lamp, opened the door to her pantry, and prepared a plate of food with all the delicacies for the old aunt. It was past midnight. The sky was adorned with plates of stars, and the angels were arranging heavenly blessings on them. Yet, none of the angels could experience the joy that the old aunt felt upon seeing the plate of food in front of her. Rupa spoke in a voice full of emotion. "Aunt, get up and eat. I have made a great mistake today. Don't hold it against me, pray to God to forgive my error." Like a naive child who forgets the scolding and reprimands upon receiving sweets, the old aunt sat and ate the food. Every pore of her being seemed to express genuine blessings, while Rupa sat and watched this spiritual scene.